Chris Rogers was destined to ride. He burst onto the local horse racing scene and made an immediate impact, winning his very first race.
He had the perfect posture on a horse and the perfect, what you might call, seat. So if you take a look at the still photos of Chris Rogers on a horse, you could see that he was born to be a race rider.
To jockey means to execute by trickery or manipulate cleverly. And in the true sense of the word, Rogers was an expert. Other stables would have better horses, but they didn't have the best rider.
He not only beat the horse that he was riding against, he beat the rider essentially. So he always put himself in a position, or had that knack, that ability, that skill to put himself in a position to defeat not only a horse that may have been better on form than the horse he was riding, but to actually essentially beat the rider.
He would lull a jockey, and meaning the jockey would think, well, Rogers' horse is spent, he's run his race. And he'd come alongside and start to move ahead, and all of a sudden Rogers would go into another gear and take off. And he did that a couple times against American riders coming up here.
Rogers was rising to the top of the Canadian game. In 1949, he rode Epic to a King's Plate victory. To prove it was no fluke, he did it again the following year on McGill. And in 1954, his knack for stealing races continued.
Celestial by about a half a length, Queen Zone moving up, and now they're going stride for stride. Celestial on the inside, Queen Zone on the outside, and they're fighting stride for stride, coming to the finish line. Being both driven hard as they come to the finish line. It's Celestial, the one to have a head advantage.
And so it's over, and the winner, Calistio, poses in the winner's circle with a very happy Chris Rogers in the saddle. Two happy and surprised owners, Walter Fitzgerald and Pete Burton of Hamilton, are congratulated by the Governor General, as is Chris Rogers, who was introduced by Mr. George Hendry, Managing Director of the Jockey Club.
Uncle Sam took notice. Rogers hit the U.S. racing circuit lined up against the greatest jockeys in the world. He contended with Willie Shoemaker, Eddie Arcaro, and every other leading rider for a good mount. But it was in 1958 that he nearly made the Kentucky Derby faithful spill their mint juleps.
Rogers was on a 47-to-1 shot called Lincoln Road. And he came out of the gate flying, but he was running against the heavy favorite Tim Tam, who was owned by the leading racing stable in the United States, Calumet Racing Stable. Anyway, Chris held his horse on the lead until the last stride, and Tim Tam beat him by a half length.
Lincoln Road has been the pace setter most of the way. He's still going strong. But there's a sensational sprint in the stretch by Tim Tam, moving up on the outside, strictly according to form. In the last 20 yards, Tim Tam clinches the victory.
2 weeks later, at the Preakness, an almost carbon copy of the Derby occurred.
In the stretch, it is almost a repeat of the Derby, with Lincoln Road desperately trying to hold off Tim Tam. But the Calumet colt goes by to win by 2 lengths, the second jewel in racing's Triple Crown. The 82nd Preakness goes to Tim Tam.
For several years, Rogers would have mounts in the Derby, but eventually he would come back to Canada. His uncanny ability to get more out of less and harvest untapped potential followed him wherever he went.
You take a look at all the wins that he had, the greatest stake wins he had, I think about half of them were baby races. So that speaks to the ability to get young horses to relax for them and to give their best, and they're still in the learning curve. And here's the quintessential professional, confident, perfect rider, riding a young horse that's not perfect, is still learning, and has great potential, and he already has that. He's been there, done that, riding a young horse. And so when you win, with the exception of the Coronation Maturity, he won all the major 2-year-old races there is in Canada. I mean, that's quite an accomplishment.
In 1976, Rogers was having one of his better years, winning 54 races. However, he was being treated for lung cancer. It was inoperable, and he passed away at the age of 52. During a career that spanned 35 years, Chris Rogers won 2,043 races.
When he came through the shed row, it was more than just another jockey coming through. He was revered.
Canadians and Hamiltonians should be exceptionally proud of what Chris Rogers accomplished, his achievements in horse racing, He was up there with the greatest Canadian-born jockeys in the history of the sport.
The Hamilton Sports Hall of Fame welcomes Chris Rogers.